Hello, everyone joining us. We're going to give just a minute or two to get everyone logged on. So join us, get cozy, have a drink, and we'll get started here in just a moment. All right. Hi. I think we got the bulk of people that are going to be in this today. So welcome to the ABCs of Forest Property Tax Programs. I am Ellie Johnson. I'm the District Forester for Leelanau, Grand Traverse, and Benzie counties. And I'm co-hosting this webinar with Sarah Kelso, who is up in Marquette and Alger, Carly DeVette, who is in Iron Baraga Conservation District, and then Winona Grisham, which is in Gogabik and Ontonagon. Hopefully I didn't butcher any of those too badly. And this is in partnership with the Michigan Society of American Foresters, Michigan Association of Conservation Districts, and of course the government entity that pays for all our grants, Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. The four of us foresters are with the Forestry Assistance Program, which is a program funded through MDARD. So the soundbite for our existence is we are a free resource for private landowners to offer technical assistance. That looks like a lot of different things. It can be site visits, referrals to private and public sector entities, and hosting educational programs like this. So this map gives an idea of all of us that have this position. We're across the state. And we are a resource for interest groups like you as well to ask different questions. We have 3 speakers today. So you're going to be hearing from Karen Madlow. She's the Commercial Forest Program Leader with the DNR Forest Resource Division. Kevin Van Giesen is the Local Government Liaison for the MDARD Qualified Forest Program. And Mike Okma is the Manager of Easement Stewardship with the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy. So if you give me one moment, I'm going to switch over to Karen's talk. All right, Karen, whenever you are ready.
Thanks, Ellie. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for participating in this meeting. As Ellie said, I'm Karen Madlow, the Commercial Forest Program Leader with the DNR. And I will be talking to you today a little bit of information about the Commercial Forest Program. So next slide, please. So the Commercial Forest Act is Part 511, Commercial Forests of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act, and in short for NREPA. The Commercial Forest Program was established in 1925 to encourage timber production in Michigan, basically to reforest Michigan. It comes with a property tax incentive. In order to be eligible to have commercial forest land, to enroll it, or to, if you acquire it, to keep it in the program, you have to have at least 40 contiguous acres. So that would be like a 20 acre and a 20 acre next to each other. You have to have a forest management plan and manage according to the plan. You have to allow foot access to the public to hunt, fish, and trap in season. And there are prohibited land uses. So you can't use commercial forest land for agriculture, grazing, industrial, developed recreation, residential, resort, commercial, or developmental purposes. The intent of the program is it's going to be managed strictly for timber management and public access. No structures or improvements are allowed on commercial forest land, including but not limited to permanent hunting blinds, camper trailers, and utilities. Owners cannot post signs to inhibit hunting access, and there is a penalty to withdraw land from the program. Next slide, please. So right now, there are 2.2 million acres plus of commercial forest land in the state. There's 53 counties that have commercial forest land, and there's 1,751 landowners currently that have commercial forest land. I will add about 98% of commercial forest lands in the Upper Peninsula. Commercial forest land runs with the land forever unless it's withdrawn. I get questions quite a bit. Well, when is the expiration date? There isn't. It runs with the land forever unless it's withdrawn. Part 511 of NAREPA requires deeds and land contracts conveying CF land to state this property is subject to Part 511, the commercial forest part of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Oftentimes I'll see deeds that were prepared by attorneys that do not have this language. So it is important to make sure that the deed does have this language for commercial forest land. DNR must be notified of all ownership changes with a copy of the deed or land contract and the owner contact information. This is a big problem that we've been having where land has been sold, commercial forest land has been sold, and then we're not notified about sales. And then we find out about them after the fact, maybe even years later, which is not a good situation for the buyer, because if they want to withdraw, the withdrawal penalty goes up usually every year. The buyer must own the surface and the timber rights, and they must withdraw if they don't own both. Land contracts must state that the vendee, the buyer, owns the timber rights to stay in commercial forest. Buyer of CF land has 60 days to submit a withdrawal application or hire a consulting forester to write their forest management plan if they want to stay in the program. If the buyer doesn't want the land in commercial forest, either the seller must withdraw prior to sale or at closing, or the buyer must withdraw once the land has been conveyed. And that's just like any other purchase agreement. It would need to be specified in the terms of who's responsible to withdraw if that's a situation that the buyer wants the land to be withdrawn. Next slide, please. If an owner doesn't own land in CF and they want to apply to enroll, which we call list, to list land, they must submit an application beginning January 1, but no later than April 1 postmark. It basically takes a year for us to process because we are required to have public hearings. We have to do a field review. So it is a lengthy process. If the application is approved, CF land is removed from the ad valorem tax roll and placed on the CF specific tax roll. Currently, the specific tax, the property tax that commercial forest owners pay is currently $1.35 an acre per year. That amount increases 5 cents every 5 years, and the next increase will occur in 2027. Commercial forest land has an assessed value of 0. So if somebody does withdraw, then they will go back on the ad valorem tax roll and will have to be assessed. Next slide. So forest management plan is a big requirement in order to stay in the program. You have to have a forest management plan and you have to manage according to that plan, including harvesting timber. Landowners must hire a consulting forester to write their plan. Most buyers cannot use a seller's plan. If the buyer receives a plan from the seller, DNR must approve the adoption of the plan and the plan writer must agree to update the plan. But again, the majority of buyers must get their own plan. Plans must meet CF plan requirements, which are posted on our website. And plans must cover a term for at least 10 years, but no more than 20 years. And a new plan is required before the plan expires. Plans are not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. Only the seller would have to give permission to release a plan that they have given to the DNR. Otherwise, the DNR cannot release that plan. Next slide. So for withdrawing, a buyer must withdraw if what they own is for CF land is less than 40 contiguous acres, if there's no access, if land is no longer eligible, and that would be, we have forest productivity requirements that have to be met, or if the owner is not compliant with the program. The application fee to withdraw is $1 per acre with a $200 minimum and a $1,000 maximum. Withdrawal penalty increases every year. And that's because of the fact that one of the factors is the inflation rate, and another factor is millage. The calculations required by Part 511 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act, and the penalty table is on the Commercial Forest website. So if you go on the website, you can just input how many years it's been in the program with a maximum of 7 and the number of acres. Most land has been in the program for at least 7 years, but if there's questions about to verify how many years it's been in the program, please contact me. Happy to get you that information. The land returns to the ad valorem tax roll the year after the land is withdrawn. So if somebody applies to withdraw this year and it's approved, the tax status doesn't change until next year. So their winter tax bill this year would still be billed at the commercial forest rate. And then next year, the assessor will have to assess the land to determine what the property taxes will be. Here is the Commercial Forest website. You can access it at michigan.gov/commercial forest. It has a lot of information, including reports to show who owns land, what their land description is, their contact information. There's reports for the county that we have to provide every year, so they can also see what our list of information is for owners and descriptions. Forms for withdrawing, for applying, and contact information. So it's also, there's a public map, which we just released, I believe, last year, so the public can see if land that they're interested in hunting. And for contacts, so I'm in Lansing, and that's my contact information. And I basically answer questions that are anything other than forestry, because I'm not a forester. We do have 3 service foresters. One is in the Western UP, Gary Willis, Eastern UP, Jason Karen, and the entire Lower Peninsula is handled by Mike Hanley. And so they would be the ones to contact if you have any forestry questions, or if there's been any hunting issues, like if somebody says that there's signs posted, no trespassing signs, or somebody is keeping out the public from going on their commercial forest land to hunt. So.
So Karen, we have a few questions for you. But first off, to address one question, yes, these slides and this recording will be available to all participants who've registered. We'll be emailing you a follow-up email with all that information. But for Karen, the first question was, does the program require landowners to allow access for hiking, or is it just for hunting, fishing, trapping?
Thank you. So the law only requires the land open to the public for hunting, fishing, trapping. Anything other than that must have the landowner permission. However, the landowner cannot give permission for something that is not allowed for on CF land. So the landowner cannot give permission to somebody to bring in their camper trailer to camp on CF land, but anything else would require permission other than hunting.
All right, and then there's a couple of questions about a sale of commercial forest property. Who should be notifying the DNR of that change of ownership? Should it be coming from the listing agent, the buying agent, or something else?
So I would be the one to contact. And right now, there is a notification form that we have on the website. And it really doesn't matter to us who contacts us, on the sell side people or on the buyer side people. It's just really important to make sure, though, that we do get contacted. Right now, the counties are also trying to get us information as well, but not all counties, particularly those in Lower Peninsula. They're less familiar about the commercial forest program than those in the Upper Peninsula. So that's why we always say, even if the counties are trying to get us information, it just is really good for the buyer or the seller to get us the information so we can make the ownership change.
All right, that's it for questions. Unless a few more come in, then we'll let you know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Next, we're going to be hearing from Kevin Van Giesen, who's the local government liaison for the MDARD Qualified Forest Program, right? He's been doing that for 5 years. Prior to that, for 13 years, he was with the local government services for Michigan Department of Treasury with the general property tax issues and county equalization. You've got a long intro because he also happens to be a level 3 MAAO Michigan assessor. He's a Michigan real estate broker, and he has an MBA with a minor in finance. So, Kevin, let me get your slides up here.
Thank you so much, Ellie.
Anytime. All right, take it away, sir.
Okay, thank you so much for allowing us to present our information from the Qualified Forest Program. As Ellie said, I'm Kevin Van Giesen. I work for the state of Michigan for Michigan Department of Agriculture and Real Estate and Rural Development. And I am one of 3. There are 3 of us in our department. Scott, Elizabeth, and myself. The number that you will see at the end of the slides, any questions or concerns, please call that number. Whoever is answering the phone will be able to answer most of the questions. We all do have our specialties for it. So if it is something that's beyond one of them, they will get a response and return the call back to you. So we always say our phones are always on. Please call if you have any questions. So, okay, let's start the slide because we're going to now learn what is the Qualified Forest Program. And as we said, it's housed in Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development. It is a property tax exemption, very similar to the Qualified Ag exemption. It encourages private forest land owners to manage their forest and require a management plan the same as commercial forest. I think our plans are a little bit more in depth due to the property tax nature. Same thing with commercial forest. We have approximately 856,000 acres, primarily in the Upper Peninsula, and then more in northern Lower, but we are scattered throughout the entire state. I believe Wayne County is the only county that we don't have a parcel enrolled. The most important piece, the takeaway from today's presentation here from Qualified Forest is the last thing on this slide. And under Michigan Statute 211-27A, Section 7, subsection P requires an owner of qualified forest property. They shall inform a prospective buyer the qualified forest property is subject to recapture tax if the parcel is ever removed from qualified forest. I'm old enough to remember working in real estate when I first started, before seller disclosure ever came out, that you didn't really have to disclose a lot of things. And then seller disclosure came out primarily for residential real improved, and I believe that there still isn't disclosure required for vacant. Most of our qualified forest property is vacant, but most are also not aware that it must be seller disclosure of that. And the main reason for it is the exact reason of the commercial forest. It is a permanent property tax exemption that remains and runs with the land in perpetuity forever, as long as the landowner is following the management plan and reporting the harvest and renewing the management plans as they expire. Then they're in good standing and will continue in our program. The only way out of our program is with the payment of recapture tax. And that's the main reason why this seller disclosure is there, but not a lot of people know about that. We're going to continue to talk about that seller disclosure a little bit more as we go through the slides here. But before we get too deep into it, everyone always asks, so how should this be done? Because of the requirements of the seller to do it. Our main words of wisdom are, it should be on the listing agreement as enrolled in the program, providing any information. But more importantly, to confirm the buyer has been made aware of it, having the buy and sell agreement address the qualified forest exemption is the perfect exact way. Because at that point in time, as they're negotiating a price and the possibility of a recapture tax payment, this is the exact time to negotiate that, because does buyer want to remain in the program or does buyer want to get out? If buyer wants out of the program, who's going to pay recapture tax? And we always say at the time of closing is the best time to actually have that all negotiated, because if it closes and buyer becomes owner, and buyer then wants out after closing and it's not covered in the buy and sell agreement, buyer is responsible for recapture tax and buyer never received a dime's worth of benefits. Believe me, I've been on a lot of those phone calls after a closing from the buyer, and those phone calls go bad in a hurry. And buyer is then saying, well, no one told us about this. And so we ask, where were your realtors during this time? Where were they disclosing, helping you in bringing this to your attention? So it becomes a big issue when buyer is not aware of the exemption and statute requires that seller must disclose it. So anyway, let's go on to the next slide where we'll talk about that. Oh, one last thing, and you can leave on this side. One last thing, the deed requirement on commercial forest states that the deed must contain that it's enrolled in commercial forest. We do not have that for qualified forest. Of the thousands of deeds I've reviewed over the last 5 years, probably less than 5% mentioned that the parcel is enrolled in the qualified forest program. It's wonderful that they do that because it brings it to everyone's attention, but qualified forest does not have that requirement at this time. So here are some of the benefits that the landowners are going to receive if the parcel is vacant and there's no structures. The current taxable value of the school operational, they're going to be exempt up to 18 mils school operational. There is an annual 2 mil fee to be in our program. So the net savings are up to 16 mils, as you can see on the first bullet point. On the second bullet point, our program here since 2014, what we call new qualified forest, the plan or the program began new for January 1st of 2014. Prior to that, we were just like commercial forest. You couldn't be in our program and have a structure. In 2014, the statute changed. Structures are allowed, but the structure, the taxable value of the structure does not receive the benefits of qualified forest, nor does it pay the annual 2 mil fee. Qualified forest is a taxable land value exemption only. We recommend that if anybody, if there are structures, obtain a copy of the property record card from your local unit assessor where the property is located. It'll break down the taxable value of the land and the improvements before they're added together as one. And that's what you're going to see that's going to come up on the tax bill. And I have just some quick examples of those coming up here in future slides to make it a little helpful for you to be able to see what the taxable values and things are, and if it might have a structure or not. Okay, next slide.
Oop, Kevin, do you mind unmuting? Sorry, you just bonked something real quick.
I guess I did. I was going through my notes here. Thank you.
Welcome back.
Okay, back to the property tax bill. I'm assuming during the listing process, a copy of a property tax bill is going to be an important piece here. This particular one that we use here is for a different type of instruction of what to look for when you're seeing it for the first time. But for you as realtors, this one is showing that Homestead is receiving 100%. If they're receiving a Homestead of 100, it's not going to be the qualified forest, but with the Homestead, they're going to be receiving up to the 18 mils exemption on both the structure and the land value. Next slide. And here was an example of one that doesn't have any type of property tax exemption. And you can see down near the lower right-hand corner, the school operating of the 18 mills. And this is 402, which is residential vacant. As a benefit of being in the qualified forest exemption program, they would be exempt from paying that $1,612.80 if they were enrolled in receiving the benefits of the qualified forest. The next two slides are guidance to assessors and landowners provided from the State Tax Commission when it comes to the assessing side of this. The first one was when the program switched over and became new for January 1st of 2014. And it's basically acknowledging to the assessors that the qualified forest program allows structures, but the structures do not receive the benefits. And then when we go to the next slide from the State Tax Commission, there we go. In late 2018, we had some changes to our act. It further then qualified that the previous memo that you saw dealt with existing structures. This one now allows new structures. And the same thing, as long as it doesn't reduce the stocking density to remain in the qualified forest program, landowners are allowed to add houses, pole barns, fencing, whatever is there. We sometimes see some solar come on, as long as each parcel by parcel basis, as long as it doesn't reduce the stocking density, they are allowed to add new to those particular parcels. The next two slides that we have, you might also see something that might appear to be ag-based, and might contain some ag use, but it is enrolled in the qualified forest program. One of the statute changes back in 14 was that allowed this combination to occur. And where it didn't meet the minimum requirements for the agricultural exemption and didn't meet the minimum stocking density requirements for the qualified forest. But when those two were added together and got above the minimum stocking density, the qualified forest exemption would then trump that, and they would be allowed to receive the exemption. So even where something doesn't look like it's completely forested and has other things going, there are other ways for landowners to continue to qualify or be in the program when it comes to that. And then this is, if they're going to consider having the ag exemption on there, this is the landowner form that they send to the local unit township assessor, and the assessor will verify how many acres of agricultural use are actually in place on that current parcel. Okay, in the next slide. I seem to mute every time we change slides here. Why don't you just fill up the slides? There are three, continue on that one. There are three, yeah, two more. There we go. We'll leave it at that. As part of Karen's program, and I'm so glad that Karen went first on this, we had a 5-year window period which ended September 1st of 2021, that if the landowner was enrolled in the commercial forest program, which is not on what we call the traditional ad valorem property tax program that everyone is paying their taxes on. If you're in commercial forest, you pay a per acre fee, and it's their own separate tax roll for that. A way of transitioning from commercial forest over to qualified forest was with this transitional qualified forest program. They applied, I believe it was the $200 fee that Karen mentioned, and then the management plan was written. They applied to qualified forest. We worked together on this. So what it allowed them is to do a transition over a 5-year period. As long as they were in the program, I believe at least 7 years, they didn't have to pay back any of the commercial forest withdrawal fee and would remain with qualified forest. This ended September 1st of 2021, but you as realtors, if you are getting a copy of the tax bill, you're going to see the traditional ad valorem tax for a taxable value and assessed value for this particular parcel. But you might see a property tax amount payment that is really small and doesn't look right. The first bullet point on here, in the first year after they enrolled in the qualified forest program, the landowners only had to pay 20% of the total tax bill. The second year was 40, the third year was 60, 80, until at the end of 5 years it was on, and they were paying the 100% tax bill, but they were still exempt from paying the school operational tax. I'm not sure how they ever came up with that program back at the time. Like I say, it ended September 1st. There are a lot of parcels out there that are in the middle of this transition. You might see a tax bill that looks a little strange. Hopefully it will say transitional qualified forest, or will have some sort of note on there. The local unit treasurers, it makes their job very difficult of doing these and tracking these and changing the percentage each year. You are also more than welcome to check with us if you find one of these and want to confirm if it's in that particular transitional program. It ended September 1st, 2021. We haven't heard of it coming back or any form of that, but we never know what might happen. So if you need to verify that it was part of that, you're welcome to contact Karen in Commercial Forest or us in our program, and we'll be more than happy to check on that for you. Some people are concerned about their parcel being in the program and being exempt from paying up to the 18 mils of school operational on the tax bill. This basically is any parcel that's principal residence exemption, qualified ag, or qualified forest is exempt from paying that. I believe the last time we saw it, qualified forest was about 2% of all of that. But the school aid fund, if there is any shortage on it, is made up for it on a per pupil basis from the school aid fund. So the local unit school districts that are held harmless, they're made whole again once that exemption is in place. Here's some details and things for it. I want to stress that we are just like the commercial forest. The qualified forest parcels remain permanently enrolled in our program. There is an affidavit after the original application is approved. There is an affidavit recorded with the County Register of Deeds in which the property is located. And to give public notice that that property is enrolled in the program. When it comes time for resale and the title company becomes involved, the title company is going to show that there is an active recorded affidavit and the parcel is enrolled in the program. So between seller disclosure on this and hopefully the listing agreement, pre-title work should show it as well. And the landowner generally talking about it, it should be pretty well disclosed, and the local assessor is going to have all of that information. So there are 3 sources to confirm, actually 4 with us if you need to check it, to confirm whether the parcel's in the program or not. Once it's in the program and the management plan calls for any harvest activity, we require a simple 1-page harvest report that provides us with what was done, the volume and the value of the cut, and the landowners get to keep and receive the proceeds from those harvests. They are going to receive a 1099-S from the harvester or person that has bought that particular harvest to the dollar value that was received. Once a program management plan is in place, and if it calls for a harvest activity to begin in 2020, the landowner is going to have 6 years to complete that. Sometimes, there are reasons why they can't get on the land, and we will work with them on that. Sales of our parcels are definitely allowed. We want the buyers and sellers to discuss the enrollment or continue or removal with the new owner prior to the sale closing. And that's why the buy and sell agreement is such a great place to address this at that particular time. If buyer wants out of the program, if they're buying it to redevelop it or use it for a different purpose, I saw one recently and they enrolled it 1 year, they removed it the next. They were able to get 10 times their price if they subbed it out into 10-acre parcels. They never ever intended to remove and take out, but they said that was their magic number. They couldn't pay recapture tax fast enough for them to remove. The recapture tax is the benefits up to the last 7 years of the benefits received, which is up to the net savings of the 16 mils. And there's a ×2 penalty if there have not been any reported harvests. You are not going to know whether there's been any harvest activity or not. We would be the ones to confirm or deny that, because we would have to have a written harvest report in our hands in order to be able to waive that ×2 penalty. Okay. And there are a whole bunch of bullet points on this one too. When we're taking a look at a new application, or if a landowner is already in and wants to be able to transfer after the sale, we always want to take a look at the most recently issued tax bills. We also want to see the most recently executed deed so that we know who the current owner is. You're going to be basically working on transfers on resales that are there. It's a simple one-page transfer form, a copy of the deed, and a copy of a management plan that covers the parcel that's being sold. Whether that's the existing management plan provided by the seller, which we will take as long as it's valid and still in place, or the buyer has the right to have a whole new management plan created at their expense. If the deed shows a trust, a corporation, or an LLC, we do need a little bit more information about that. We do need to know who are the signing trust owners for the current trustees executing a transfer affidavit. Corporations, we need to know who is the corporate president, or if it's an LLC, we need to know the members who are authorized to sign. If the land contract is in place, we generally require the seller to sign a document that commemorates that the buyer is going to remain in the qualified forest program and be able to conduct harvests. If you remember the word, I believe it's the waste clause in a land contract, prohibits the severance or removal of anything from the parcel that's subject to the terms and conditions of the land contract. Waste and removal could be considered a harvest activity as required by a management plan. It's a real big deal. If they're going to be selling by a land contract, one of the terms and conditions can be added in, and one of the bottom lines is buyer enrolled in qualified forest, or seller enrolled in qualified, and buyer is going to remain and follow the management plan and allows the harvest activities. If not, we do have a sign-off form that we would require the seller to sign to acknowledge that they're allowing their buyer to do that under the terms and conditions of the land contract. Okay. For our program, it's very similar to Karen's. For commercial forest, the taxable status in Michigan is December 31st for the next tax year. So when it comes to splits in combinations, whether it's being enrolled, sold, removed, or whatever, we do require the assessor approval and written confirmation from the assessor, or some counties, equalization departments process those for the local units. We need the tentative new parcel number, legal description, and number of acres. And we need that before we will be processing any applications, which would include transfers, removals, rescissions, and splits. We like to use the word tentative with the assessors or the equalization, because if this is something that's done after March Board of Review, splits, combinations, and all of those things aren't processed until December 31st of the current tax year to be made available for next year. And the reason that that's important is it's the same thing. If a landowner is enrolling in qualified forest for the first time and they record an affidavit today, they're considered as enrolled in our program, but the tax benefits don't begin until January 1st of next year, because of the taxable status being December 31st for the next tax year. I like to use the example in assessing. If a house or a garage or something catches fire and burns down on December 31st, on January 1st, that taxable value is changed. If that happens on January 1st, it doesn't come off until December 31st of the end of that same year. So even though it burned down or went away on January 1st, taxable status is December 31st. And that's the important part for any of the exemption activity that we have going with qualified forest and with commercial forest as well. This probably isn't anything that's too relevant for you as the realtors and things. It's a little bit more of the plan information. We need maps. Maps are great because they're gonna take it and show us on a parcel basis. Summary and harvest schedule. We want the acres to balance. And then here is the commercial harvest activity where I was just talking about the 1099. I left this on here because a lot of you might see the copy of the management plan from the seller. And these are the major things that are addressed. A management plan is a complete inventory of what's there on the parcel or parcels, and then gives prescriptions to how to move forward with what needs to be done. It might require planting, it might require trimming, total harvest and go back into regeneration. The plans are very inclusive. Your conservation district forestry assistant staff are also wonderful sources when you have questions about those plans. I'm like Karen, I am not the biological side on this. That is my coworker Scott's side. He does a wonderful job. I'll talk taxes and the business side with you all day long. When it comes to the biological side, I do have a little bit of information on that, but Scott is the best source for that information. Okay, now here's our follow-up slide. Thank you for letting me get to this. As we started out from the buy and sell agreement is probably the best place to address how the exemption is going to go forward with this sale. It's wonderful to see it in the listing agreement. It's a perfect spot, but buy and sell shows that seller disclosure was actually made. Seller made the disclosure and buyer now has that information and can hopefully make an informed decision. And here, the second one, seller disclosure, same thing, land contracts. They need to also address the qualified forest exemption if it's enrolled in the program to be able to address the waste issue. When it comes to parcel splits or combos, those have to be approved through the local assessor or the local equalization director. If the parcel enrolled in qualified forest is being split or combined, if it's being split, it might be split and not meet the minimum requirements to remain in the program. So I caution everyone on their splits, because you might be creating this split and not be able to remain in the program. Same thing with combos. We'll allow you to do a combo, but you're going to have to apply for what's coming in that's possibly non-qualified forest to be combined with a qualified forest exemption. There are some assessors that have learned the hard way on this. They've created a tax exemption conflict when they have combined a non-QF parcel with a QF parcel. So we just want everyone to be aware splits and combos are allowed, but we need to be part of that at the point of the beginning of that, not at the end after it's done. Remember, there can be qualified ag and forest combos for those that separately don't meet our exemption guidelines. And the qualified forest program, the ask from the realtors, we just buy and sell agreement. That's what we would really like to ask from you, is to make sure that those do cover that at the point of that particular sale.
Oh, wait, come back, Kevin.
Go. The last side here is our MDARD email address, phone number, and we have a great website, michigan.gov/QFP. We do have a section in there, I believe, that shows our FAQs, or frequently asked questions. If I had to pick a piece that was most helpful to anyone trying to learn a little bit more about our program, I would print off a copy of the FAQs. Please stay tuned to that. I'm in the process of updating those based on these presentations and things that we're doing here. I've got one that's almost close to being updated, so stay tuned, because there will be a new version out there for it. There is my particular name. The phone number there is our mainline phone number. I take turns answering the phones with Scott and Elizabeth. Whoever answers the phone should be able to answer any and all questions. If they don't, they will research and get back. And then we also include Karen on there, because a lot of times they get mixed up between qualified forest and the commercial forest. We'd like to have both of those out there because it makes it easier for us to work back and forth. And if it's the wrong one, we'll always give you the number for who you should be calling. So we do work well back and forth together. This afternoon, I did see a few questions pop up. So if there are some questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Kevin. That was very, very informative. And I can attest to the fact that the QFP folks in the office there are really great about answering the phone and answering emails and answering everyone's questions, and are willing to take the time to help you out. So we have a few questions here. The first one is really related to both Kevin and Karen. So if she's on, she can pop in and answer that, or Kevin can probably answer it for both of you. But just to reiterate, when someone does a timber sale on the property, the proceeds and the revenue from that timber sale, do they go directly to the landowner? Does some of that go to the state? How does that process really shake out?
In our program, and I believe Karen's as well, but I'll let Karen address that if she's able. All proceeds remain with the landowner. They receive a 1099, and their only requirement is to report that harvest to us in the stands and the activity and volume and value. And it's a simple one-page form, that's the report form that's available on our website as well.
To follow up with Kevin, so similar with the commercial forest program, where the proceeds go to the owner of the land, the owner has to make sure, though, before they do any harvesting, we have a cutting notification form that they have to provide to the DNR service forester for review 30 days in advance of harvest. And that's about it.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, both of you. Kevin, could you please clarify, so the homestead versus the residential category, and how is that categorized within QFP?
Sure. Residential, agricultural, industrial, commercial, timber cutover, they are all classifications for taxation. And in the lower peninsula, generally we see most everything classed for residential. Residential is simply, it doesn't fit the other classifications. In the UP, primarily, we'll see a lot of the tax bills with the timber cutover if they've had some harvest activity and things going on. It's all in how the assessors are studying the taxation classes for their sales studies. Residential classification doesn't prevent the harvest of forest products. Recreational use is probably the highest use of the residential classification for taxation. Industrial and commercial kind of have their own little things for it. We do have some commercial properties that are enrolled in qualified forest. They have other things going on. The value of their buildings exceeds the land value, so they're classed that way for taxation.
Thank you. We also have a specific question from someone who's working with a landowner who is enrolling in QFP. and they're also transferring their property from an LLC into an individual name. So should they do that transfer into the LLC before they enroll in QFP or after the fact?
We would strongly recommend that the current ownership enroll as it's currently owned before any transfers are done. Once it's enrolled in the program, one of the benefits of receiving of being in our program is they're going to be the original enrollment is one affidavit for the school tax affidavit for the school tax exemption. After a transfer, if the transferee wants to remain in the program, one of the benefits of that, they receive that new school tax affidavit in the new name, but they'll secondly receive a taxable value affidavit so that the taxable value will remain capped after that transfer.
Great. The next question, I think, relates to a lot of QFP properties where they have blinds and things like that that have all the comforts of home. And so what is considered a structure in relation to QFP, and what determines if it should or shouldn't get that exemption?
Anything that is not there naturally. If it's not a tree that's growing or a blade of grass that's growing, if it's something that's added, it is considered a structure. That can be fencing, blinds, anything that is taxable and or assessable. The only exception to that would be, I believe, camping type trailers that have a valid license plate on them. They are being taxed in a different manner because of having the license plate on it. You bring in a temporary shed, put up a fence, have a dock on your lake. Those are all assessable improvements. They were not there naturally.
That is good to know. So the next question here is there a list somewhere that has all the property that's enrolled in QFP, or a map or something like that where folks can see what properties are already in the program and what are not?
That is a really great question. We are working to get to that point. There are so many different variables and things for these, and because we're throughout the entire state of Michigan, we do provide a list to confirm with the local assessors as they're doing their tax roll, so that we can have a name, a number of acres, and a parcel number. And that's where we probably learn about 90% of our transfers, or where there's been a change that's been made because the buyers didn't do it. And that's a huge problem. In fact, there was a couple of them this year. They were transfers from 2020. Someone was finally taking a look at the list and the names weren't lining up. So they started asking us about it, and it's going back. Seller never disclosed to buyer. And then all of a sudden that buyer is contacting us and yelling and screaming at us because seller never told them it was included in qualified forest. They've been receiving the benefits all along, and now they're going to be subject to recapture and being removed if they don't take action. So we do provide lists to those that are administering it. And our goal is to get, we would like the list on our website, and we would also like to do it with a map. The list coming to the website will probably, hopefully, be happening within the year. We would love to have that. The map is the next, and they're both in the works. They've been on our wish list. They are in the works, and we would love to have that come up.
Yeah, that would be a great resource, I think, for a lot of folks to have. Back to the structures. So does the Qualified Forest Program require approved land divisions for the non-exempt structures?
If I understand that question correctly, the landowner does not have to split because of having a structure on there. The local taxing assessor will have that done internally on the record card, and they will have a taxable value for that of the pure land only. And then there will be a separate taxable value for any structures or improvements. The 2 mil fee and the benefits will be received on the land value exemption side only. the structures will pay the full 18 mills. That is done internally on the record card. BSNA software is the assessing software used and approved throughout the entire state of Michigan. They have a way of doing that internally that generates it to be able to do that. If any landowner or anyone has any questions about that, I encourage them to talk to their local assessor and ask for a copy of that record card. They can then see what's being assessed and how it's been done, and make sure it's being assessed and calculated correctly. It's public information. It's not hidden. It is public. You can see my record card. I mean, if someone asks for it, it's public information.
Perfect. Just a couple questions so far left to go. So can you speak to the privacy of properties enrolled in the Qualified Forest Program and how that is different or similar to the Commercial Forest Program?
I don't think that there is any privacy side of that, except on the management plan. Statute has made any management plan that's in our possession is not subject to FOIA. We can't release it without a court order or else written permission from the current landowner that had that created. Our program, you have to record a qualified forest affidavit with the local county register of deeds to give public notice for that. So it's not private, but it's public notice, and that will show up on a title commitment and property tax bill, tax record card, all things that are not considered. In ours, it's the management plan that is considered non-FOIAble and we cannot release.
Excuse me, Kevin, they may be
Yes.
referring to hunting and fishing and track, like commercial forest.
Oh,
It
okay.
has to be open to the public. Maybe that was.
In our program, it can be posted as private. We do not require public access on qualified forest links. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, so their management plans and their documents are private and not FOIAble, and also the property does not have to be open to the public. So
That's
both
correct,
of those are private within the Qualified Forest Program. Perfect. Okay, last question so far. How many years back does the recapture tax go for the Qualified Forest Program?
There's a limit of up to the last 7 years. If the parcel has only been in the program the last 2 years, then it's only the prior 2 years. But there's a 7-year limit. So if it's been in the program and it started in 14, so we're coming up here to 9 years. So if it was enrolled in 14, it's only going to be the last 7 years worth of benefits for the payback period. And that's a little interesting as well. If the landowner decides that they want to have the parcel removed or part of it, or if they're not following their management plan and we are asking to have them removed, then we create, if the landowner wants out, there's a 1-page rescission form. If we want them out, either way, we send a letter to the county register, to the county treasurer's office and ask that this parcel be removed and for the treasurer to start the recapture tax process. And then we let them know whether there's been a harvest or not as to whether the ×2 activity, and we give them the number of years that we show that was enrolled in the program.
All right, we had one more question come in. So do you have any tips on what legal experts would be best to direct landowners towards for questions regarding navigating future land purchase plans? Or should the landowners reach out directly to you folks?
If it's a county conservation district that has a forestry assistance program, we always recommend that the landowners contact their county conservation district first and ask for forestry assistance. You are all great resources and are great frontline people, and we say the local boots on the ground to help. They're also welcome to call our phone number as well. We are more than happy to help. If they're more comfortable dealing with a forester that writes forest management plans or is involved in some, and they're, you know, whatever they're comfortable doing. If someone wants more, we are always referring on to the County Conservation District Forestry Assistance Program. They're wonderful. They do a great job. And they're the ones that helped organize and host this. So I can't give them kudos enough for the work that they do.
And I'd just like to add, one of the big problems we have is notification and buyers knowing that the land's in the program. And I get calls after the fact from buyers that are very unhappy because maybe they were told it was in the commercial forest program, but they didn't know anything about it. They didn't know they'd have to pay this huge withdrawal penalty to get out, or that they couldn't build on it or anything like that. So I highly recommend that any potential buyer contact me, and I will give them all sorts of information about the program, both sides, whether they want to stay in, whether they want to get out. And that's a good first start, so that they have enough information to make a intelligent decision based on the information available. So
Great words, Karen.
Thank you.
Because it's the same thing for us. Those calls go bad when it's after the fact, when it's after the closing. And had the buyer had the right facts to be able to make an informed decision prior to closing, that's our ultimate goal. And that's why we're all here today, is to hopefully help inform everyone along the way of that information and how to reach out and seek that information to be able to make an informed decision.
Exactly. Thank you for the great plug for the Forestry Assistance Program, Kevin. And thank you for your presentation and answering the questions. I'm not seeing any more here, so I think we can move on to our next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Kevin, for I don't know, singing our praises there for a hot second. So now we're going to move, last but not least, to Mike Okma, who is the manager of easement stewardship with the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy. And so you are helping to oversee the conservation easements on 22,000 acres. That seem right? Yeah. So he's probably going to know what he's talking about. So let me swap over here to his PowerPoint. And you can take it away, Mike.
All right, thanks, Ellie. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming and thanks for letting me be here. As I was introduced, I'm Mike Okma with the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy. We are a nonprofit land conservation organization, and we can move on to the next slide. We've been in existence for 32 years. In total, so far, we've protected over 46,000 acres. That includes about 150 miles of shoreline and over 120 miles of trail for public access. We have a service area that we work within. So we're in a 5-county service area, which includes Antrim, Benzie, Grand Traverse, Kalkaska, and Manistee counties. But we are not the only land conservancy organization in the state. There are many of us, and we all have discrete service areas. So depending on where you all are working elsewhere in the state, there might be a similar organization that basically does the same tasks that we do, provides the same services that we do, but works in different parts of the state. And I'll go on the next slide and get more into what we do. The Conservancy protects both privately owned land and land open to the public. Our mission focuses mainly on permanently protecting critical land within watersheds, high quality farmland and forest land. And our goal is to safeguard water quality, water or wildlife habitat, and maintain viable land for farming within our region. One of the big ways that we do that is through private land protection. And I'll go through a little bit of the bullets on the next slide. So to date, we've protected over 26,000 acres of private land. The tools that we use to do this are conservation easements, as well as purchase of development right programs called PDR programs. Essentially, it's the same tool. They're both conservation easements, but they get enacted in a little bit of a different way. The PDR programs are government or township run programs where the township votes on a millage, and the money generated from that tax mill goes into a pot that the township uses to buy conservation easement restrictions on farmland. And our role in that is staff in our organization will help a township implement their program, both usually on the negotiation side of the contracts and sometimes on the monitoring side. And then we hold conservation easements ourselves. The Conservancy works with willing landowners to negotiate restrictions on their property, and then we monitor and enforce those into perpetuity. I'll go to the next slide. Some more about what conservation easements are. A few facts about our role is we hold over 300 conservation easements. Like I mentioned before, we work with willing landowners to place restrictions on their property. If you think of conservation easements, their purpose is to limit development on a parcel in a way that preserves and protects its unique habitats or conservation value. Kind of like a second layer of zoning almost. And these restrictions are in perpetuity. They travel with the deed, and unlike the other programs that were talked about today, there's no buyout option. So once a landowner places a conservation easement on their land, it stays there forever. And the land stays on the tax rolls. And whether it's natural land or farmland. And then roughly for us, this tool gets used for more than half of our land that we've protected. So that 46,000 acre number, more than half of the land we do land protection on goes through either conservation easement or the PDR program. So benefits of conservation easements. They protect property. That's the big benefit. So it limits development in a way that protects the conservation values of the property, which provides habitat values and public benefit in a way that it's ensuring that these natural landscapes are available in our region. Where it really meets the road is the monetary benefits. And so for the original donor, the original landowner who restricted the property, they may be eligible for federal tax incentives. If the specific restrictions meet IRS qualifications, the amount of value that their property was diminished by, they can claim as a charitable donation. Another benefit is that the taxable value doesn't become uncapped at transfer. So once a piece of property is restricted with a conservation easement, whenever it transfers, it's not subject to the pop-up tax. And this is governed by the PA 446. You can look that up, but it helps a lot and encourages conservation easements, especially when land is going through like generational transfer. Lots of farmers opted in once this PA 446 was enacted as a way to transfer land to their kids and have them be able to afford it, because there's lots of land rich and cash poor people in our communities, and moving property to their kids might be intended in their family, but the kids might not be able to afford it under the new property taxes, or continue to farm it under the new property taxes. So having those remain capped has been a big game changer for a lot of folks. And then because the conservation easement is a restriction on land and it devalues the market value of the land, it also should be reflected in the property taxes. So the property taxes for land and conservation easements should also be reduced. And we have a few things that we share with folks about, I have a state memo from the state tax commission that requires assessors to recognize the conservation easement restrictions when they assess the land, and encourages them to use the before and after appraisal methodology to do so. And I'll kind of go through an example of that later on. And then another great benefit of conservation easements is outside of the restrictions, in each unique document, the landowner retains all other private property rights. So like what was talked about in the other two programs, one allows public access, the other doesn't. And in conservation easement lands, the landowner retains all of their private property rights, so it does not get open to the public. For me and for landowners and for real estate agents, one of the tricky parts is, how do I know that there's a conservation easement here? They are recorded documents, so they are on file at the appropriate register of deeds. They will appear in title search. They often appear in the exceptions part of a title search. So sometimes people don't fully read them or consider exactly what they are. The title will often be conservation easement or farmland easement or conservation deed. And because it has the word easement in there, lots of people confuse it with like an access easement or something that runs adjacent to a piece of property. Whereas a conservation easement actually restricts the uses on it. It provides an actual interest in the land that the Conservancy then holds. And so they're a little bit of a different beast, and people don't always understand that it's something that really should be investigated and read, and make sure they understand it before they take ownership of the property. You can also see them on the BSNA systems. Those are searchable for all the counties. So in some cases, they're in there encoded. I try to encourage local assessors that I work with to use the property class code system of 160 or 460, and those stand for like ag conservation restricted or residential conservation restricted. I'm not an assessor, so I'm not sure if it causes other problems in using those codes, but they seem to fit the bill pretty obviously, and sort of put a red flag on there that this has some conservation restrictions for other people to note. Also, there are spaces in the BSNA system for assessors just to put notes on the record, so that might be a more appropriate spot for someone to add that. Sometimes it's also included in parcel data. So if you go to your county equalization department or look it up online, oftentimes you can do parcel searches by tax ID or like with mapping widgets. And if you click into a parcel, sometimes on its attribute table or sort of its data lookup, there'll be a note in I see it most often in like the legal descriptions section. Lots of times equalization folks will also add a note in there about conservation easement restricted or something to that effect. And then the surefire way is to contact the qualified organization that holds the conservation easement. So that would most likely be the functioning conservancy within your service area, or a local unit of government like the township if they're holding easements. Because as the holder of the easement, we're responsible for enforcing all of those. So we keep track of where they all are, and we can let you know if a tax parcel has a conservation easement on it or not. Go on to the next one, please. Thank you. One of the big things that I've noticed over the last 15 years that I've been working with conservation easements is that it's just key, and communication is really key, whether it's between the Conservancy and the local unit of government, or the Conservancy and the real estate agent who's listing the property. First, I'll talk about how we overlap with local government and zoning. Counties and townships, they're responsible for enforcing their own zoning regulations and reviewing land use permits or land division applications. And then my responsibility in stewarding the conservation easement restrictions are actually very similar. I'm responsible for making sure that if there's any restrictions on structures such as the size or the location they can be placed or what they can be used for, falls under lots of times overlaps with zoning. We're also restricting in conservation easements typically uses out of the land, whether it's an ag use or maybe only a certain portion of the land can be used for ag. They often limit commercial uses, so there's different restrictions on that end. And then a big one that I see is that conservation easements will commonly restrict the number of divisions that are retained. So a landowner who owns, say, 40 or 80 acres of land, the conservation easement might limit them to only 1 or 2 future land divisions. And this is not like recorded front and center. You have to read the whole document to see this. So just knowing that it's in a conservation easement, if you're the local county or the township and you're approving a land division application, you're going to go through the steps in the Michigan, Land Division Act, and based on their parcel size and time of since last division, you're going to go through that calculator and approve a permit where without possibly even knowing that that parcel is actually only limited to 1 land division. When these sort of misses in communication happen, it can be really tricky to untangle them because the landowner is left holding an approved land division at the county level, and then they have a prohibited situation with us at the easement enforcement level. And all the regulations are cumulative, so compliance with one authority doesn't mean compliance with another. And so if we're able to communicate across departments better, and make each other aware of applications, either for land use or building permits or land divisions, we can sort of review them together and save each other lots of headaches down the road. And a lot of those same considerations I've seen in the transfer of easements. It's just a matter of clear communication with all of the parties. So like we talked about in the previous presentation, communication and disclosure is really important when it comes to conservation easements. If the sale interested buyer is not necessarily running title right away, and if the realtor doesn't put it on the listing that has a conservation easement, people don't know the right questions to ask. And I also really encourage listing agents to contact me if they know that if the landowner discloses there's a conservation easement there or they learn about it otherwise. I'm more than happy to work with the real estate agent and or any interested buyers to explain the conservation easement, to answer questions. The time of transfer, ownership transfer is really sort of risky on our end. We find that there are lots of violations that occur shortly after ownership transfer, particularly because the original grantor, they negotiated most of the terms and understand them and they fit with their land use. Whereas we call a second generation owner or the next buyer, these are restrictions that are imposed on them. They weren't a part of the negotiations, and so often they don't fit their land uses as well. Or they have lots of questions about, I'm buying the property to do X, Y, and Z, and they want assurance that that can happen before they buy it. So I'm always happy to have all those conversations and review the easement and get people the best answers I can so that they have all the information they need before they purchase property. And again, you can't always tell what uses had been executed just by reading the conservation easement. So even if it is disclosed by the landowner, you might not know that 2 of the 4 divisions have been executed, or it might show that they retain the right for X amount of structures or an additional this or that in the easement. And some of those things will have been previously executed and not necessarily obvious at the time someone picks up the easement. So working with the holder of the easement, whether it's a conservancy or a unit of government, is really important. Coming back around to determining value of a conservation easement, if you are the donor of the easement, the original grantor, and you are seeking a tax deduction, you're gonna need to have a qualified appraisal in order to substantiate the value of your donation. And you'll work with a third-party appraiser to do what we call a before and after appraisal. And they simply appraise the property first at its unrestricted value before the easement restrictions were put on. And then they consider all of the unique restrictions and they appraise it again under that scenario. And you'll see in the example on the bottom of this slide that say its unrestricted value was $1 million and its after value or restricted value is 600,000. So the 600,000 would be its restricted value or its sale price on the market. And then if a landowner was seeking a donation or a federal income tax deduction, the value of their donation would be the difference or the depreciation. So it'd be that 400,000 that they could claim as a charitable contribution. That charitable contribution can only be claimed by the original landowner or donor. So if you buy a piece of property protected with an easement, you're not able to recoup any of that value. You will benefit from the transfer tax, the capping of the transfer tax, and the lowering of property taxes in general. And if you are coming at it from the resale process, you could do a before and after appraisal again and base it on the current market in order to kind of get that listing price. Or I've worked with realtors in the past to do sort of like a market analysis. Lots of real estate agents are trained in order to do that. And I can look back in my files if I'm asked at the right time to see if there was an appraisal done, like at the time of donation, and we can take that original appraisal and not use the values, but use the percentage. So I could say it was at the time of easement, the easement reduced its value by 40%. And then you as the real estate agent or whoever's doing the market analysis can look at the current market, determine its current value, and then decide if it's appropriate to reduce it by 40% to account for that conservation easement. That seems to work fairly well just to get a listing price that's not too far off base. Because I have seen too in the past that can be a real problem in selling easement restricted land, is just having it not valued correctly. When an educated buyer comes in and looks at it and sees all these restrictions and feels like they're paying full market value for that, it gets to be a hard thing to move on the market. So those are the biggest problems that I come across with conservation easement stewardship and transferring them or working with townships or other units of government. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Mike. That was a great presentation. We do have a couple of questions here. The first one is, are conservation easement enrollees required to have a professional forest management plan developed for the property? And are they allowed to carry out timber sales?
Yep, so if the landowner retains the right for forest management, typically we have some processes built into that. So we'll require them to work with a professional forester to write a plan, usually like a 15 to 20 year duration plan. And then we review and approve that plan before they can implement anything. So that just ensures that the plan that's being put in place doesn't affect the conservation values of the property or the purpose that the easement is there to protect. And then once we get through that step, we require just a timber harvest notice, like 30 days prior to any activity on there. So during the life of that plan, as you're moving through there and doing different forest management and different stands, you just provide the conservancy with notice prior to harvest, and that helps us review the plan, compare that to the current activity, make sure everything is in compliance, and then you're off and running. And just like the other programs, all the value and the sale goes directly back to the landowner. With the conservancy doesn't get involved in any of that.
Awesome. So another question, is there a minimum property size to put into the conservation easement? Where is the application found to do this, and are there any fees associated?
So the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy, we have acceptance criteria that we use to vet property. And our floor for acreage is 40 acres. But that's just our own rule to sort of help keep us efficient and a good return on investment. And we can essentially break that rule as long as it gets board approval. So there are some things that will help us bend the rules, like if you're adjacent to an existing conservation easement, or what you have has really high conservation value, it might be worth doing the project, even if it's smaller acreage. So I'd encourage anybody to ask the question, even if you're under 40 acres. And basically you just contact us either by phone or by email. I just manage the stewardship of existing conservation easements. There's another department called the Land Department within our organization, and they sort of take all the incoming landowners and work with them to decide what their land protection goals are and if it's a good fit, and then they'll work to negotiate the terms of the easement. So that's kind of how it flows through us. Different land conservancies might have a little bit different criteria or different size requirements, depending on who you end up working with.
Thank you. So I have another one. It's kind of more of a comment than a question. It's property class codes 160, 260, and 460. Were removed from the CAMA and therefore are no longer available for BSA through the codes of taxable status. Don't know if you have anything to add on that.
I didn't hear all of your audio, so if there was another way to.
It's also in the chat too. But
Perfect. Oh, I was unaware that those codes were removed. I just, like, last year or the last 2 years, I reached out to assessors in my service area and gave them all a list of the tax IDs that have easements on them. And I'm not sure if they were flagged using those 160 or 460 codes, or if they just put notes in the records. I sort of left that up to the assessors since I'm not an assessor, but I was just trying to reach out to assessors to tighten that gap and make it easier for us to communicate back and forth and be aware of where easements are. I think if you're reaching out, if you're a realtor or a landowner interested in buying property and you want to find the easement, I think if you reach out to the township or equalization, or the quickest way is just to find the conservancy that's working in your service area and contact their easement stewardship team and either give them the address or the tax parcel ID, and they should be able to let you know if a conservation easement exists there. They're also, since they're all recorded documents, we can share them as part of public records. So you can either look them up at the register, or I will email, if it's something I work on, I'll email you a PDF of the easement terms. And that way it's a quick and easy read, and you can follow up with me with any questions.
Perfect. Karen had one other comment as well. If the land is in commercial forest program, it must be withdrawn if there is any language in the conservation easement that is contrary to the program, such as language prohibiting public access. So just one other little comment about CF and then the conservation easements.
yeah,
Yeah.
Karen, did you want to expand on that more too?
And that is it for questions.
Yeah, actually, this just came up the other day. I had an assessor contact me about somebody who had just recently established a conservation easement on commercial forest land, and it said no public access, no hunting, everything that is contrary basically to the Commercial Forest Act. And so, and really they have two options, but I kind of defer to Mike on one of them. So one option is to withdraw, but Mike, can they amend the conservation easement to remove language that is contrary? Is that allowed?
Conservation easements can be amended, however, there's like standards an amendment has to meet, so they can't, it can't release any protections or do anything that would affect conservation value in a negative way, and create like a permanence issue per se. And so typically they need to cause a net neutral impact to conservation value or a net benefit. So as long as they can meet the, sort of requirements of an amendment and changing that language, that could be an option. All the easements that we do in our organization, we don't require private property, and there are very, very, very few of them that limit hunting. Some landowners want their property preserved as sort of like a wildlife sanctuary, but we encourage them to have that be part of their own private land management and to not restrict that for a future owner, but basically because hunting and fishing is such a big part of what people own land for in our region, like we found it just makes it really hard to sell it if that restriction is in there. Additionally, those are sorts of things that I found are like really hard to monitor, for me to monitor and enforce as the person responsible for that. I come once a year to a property to monitor for compliance, and so preventing somebody from hunting on it is not something I want to have to deal with. So we stay away from that. But yeah, and we can overlap, like Karen's saying, like you can be enrolled in both programs, or as long as they're not in conflict with each other. So I do have a number of easement landowners who are also in either the QFP or certified forest program, and like I explained before, it's just as simple as their program meshing with our reviews and approvals, and so you just get the timing lined up and it works really smooth. So
yeah, that's another situation of information where the owner went ahead and did something without checking to see, is this going to work? So, and now they're stuck because they're basically going to have to withdraw, because I don't know if they're going to be able to amend it or not, but yeah.
Amendments are sort of a risky situation for the qualified holder, because they have to report them to the IRS. And so it creates this sort of a fear of audit, both from the landowner and from the holding organization. And in order to hold the conservation easement, the organization has to be a qualified organization under rules of the IRS. And so if the IRS were to audit, or if for some reason decide that an amendment was done incorrectly or provided some sort of impermissible private benefit, it would cause problems for the landowner as well as the organization, to the ultimate effect of potentially losing your status or your ability to hold easements. So when we enter into amendment negotiations, it can be a lot trickier than what would reasonably be assumed. So yeah.
Great information. Thank you, Mike.
We do have one more question that just popped up for you, Mike. And that's, can the initial landowner relinquish the conservation easement that they put in place?
No, once the easements are signed and recorded, they're there for perpetuity. So yeah.
Well, that is it for
Awesome.
questions for you.
Yeah, and if anyone's got some final things to ask while we're all here. I was a teacher in a past life, so I can be patient for a little bit while you think about your questions. But otherwise, thank you for joining. So yeah, we recorded this. So this is going to be on the Society of American Foresters YouTube channel. And everyone that signed up, you will be getting a follow-up email with like a survey critiquing us on how we did, but also have all these slides and any other like handouts and links that the speakers feel are relevant for you to have based on all this stuff. So again, thank you for joining and thanks for all your niceties that are coming into the chat, and we'll see you at the next one.